Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, I'm going to be honoring Earl Hamner on the anniversary of his birthday. I recently learned a lot more about Earl and his life and career via various different resources. A lot of this came from A Journey That Continues to Ennoble, 2007, by George Brosey, who was the editor of the Appalachian Heritage. And this is part of Earl Hamner's website and the biographical information there. So you can certainly go to Earl's website and cover this, reread it, inspect it more, do more research of your own on Earl and his amazing life and career. So it starts off by, he was born July 10th, 1923 in Schuyler, Virginia. His mother was Doris Marion, and his father was Earl Henry Hamner Sr. He was the oldest of 8 children, 4 brothers and 3 sisters. Now, of course, on the Waltons, they condensed that to 7 children, so 2 of Earl's brothers were condensed into the character of Ben, played by Eric Scott. Doris Giannini, her family emigrated from Lucca, Italy in the 1700s, and Earl Sr.'s family came from northern Wales. John and Olivia's couple origin mirrors the real story of Earl's parents. Earl Sr. courted Doris at the age of 16. He was 20 and lacked an upstanding reputation. Orally, Doris's mother, a devout Baptist, forbade Doris from seeing Earl, but he was persistent. They eventually married, and Orally strongly disapproved, but eventually she saw the strength of their marriage and came around. In the early 1900s, the Hamner family moved from its James River tobacco farm to the town of Schuyler. Schuyler was a company town for a soapstone mine where Earl Sr. worked, and was his employer when Earl and Doris's first son was born. That would be Earl. While money was short and books were a luxury for the family, the only books that the Hamner family owned were the Holy Bible and a manual of beekeeping. Earl Jr. became interested in writing very young. He learned to read by the age of 4 and wrote his first poem, My Dog, at age 6. The poem was published in the children's page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. That was when Earl knew he would be a writer. Again, mirroring John Walton, when the soapstone mine closed during the Depression, Earl Sr. found work in a town as a machinist at a DuPont factory in Waynesboro, Virginia. He stayed in a boarding house in Waynesboro through the week and every weekend took the bus to Charlottesville, then transferred to another bus which took him to Hickory Creek, and then a 6-mile walk home. This 6-mile hike on Christmas Eve 1933 became the inspiration for the homecoming. In his biography of Hamner, Jim Person describes Earl Sr. He enjoyed storytelling, hunting, fishing, and occasionally drinking a little too much of a bootlegged liquor known as the Recipe, which was distilled by a pair of elderly neighbors, a widow and her maiden daughter. Full of life, he would on occasion look lovingly at Doris and exclaim, "What a woman I married," and then lift her in his arms and whirl her about. At other times, he would gaze at his 8 red-haired children seated around the kitchen table and declare, "All my babies are thoroughbreds." So some of these things you might recognize from scenes that actually were in the film The Homecoming. While Earl's parents didn't receive much formal education themselves, they strongly encouraged their children to stay in school. Earl's great-aunt was his 6th-grade teacher. She encouraged his interest in writing much in the way Miss Hunter did for John Boy. Earl spent his first 16 years close to home, never traveling beyond 40 miles from his Schuyler home. It wasn't until his senior class trip to New York for the World's Fair in 1939 that Earl's world expanded. Earl recalls that the family had never had a telephone and that on the New York trip he had to be shown how to work one. That same year, young Earl graduated at the top of his class from Schuyler High School. After graduating from Schuyler High School, Earl, with the help of the local doctor's wife, received a scholarship to the University of Richmond. While the scholarship covered tuition, money was tight, so sending Earl to live away from home in Richmond would be quite the burden. 3 of his father's sisters shared a home in Richmond. It was not a light undertaking, but they were open to the idea of Earl Jr. coming to live with them while he studied at the University of Richmond. Nora was an executive with the American Lung Association. As a young woman, she had traveled the Blue Ridge backcountry as a nurse on horseback. Doesn't that sound familiar? So clearly, this Nora was the inspiration for the county nurse in the Waltons that then led Mary Ellen to taking over that route up in the mountains. Lottie, a divorced mother, was an office manager, and Margaret was a dietitian at Camp Marywood Harrison, a summer camp on the outskirts of Richmond for underprivileged children. Earl worked in the summer painting dorms and was a dispatcher for the Brooks Transportation Company during the school year to help pay his expenses. In 1943, in the middle of his sophomore year, Earl was drafted into the U.S. Army. He trained at Fort Knox. Here he befriended Paul Nuznik, a Jewish man from Philadelphia and one of the most profound influences on his life. Nuznik hated the Army, but loved American literature and introduced Hamner to a long list of authors, including Thomas Wolfe, Sherwood Anderson, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and William Faulkner. Hamner then spent several months at the 19th Replacement Depot in England, learning how to defuse landmines, one of the most dangerous jobs in the Army. 2 months after D-Day, he landed on Omaha Beach, and because his officers had discovered that he knew how to type, he was reassigned to the 542nd Quartermaster Corps, where he served in Paris. He loved Paris, learned to speak French, and made friends with the French people, including a special girl named Janine. It was here after the end of the war that he began in earnest sending off stories for publication and amassing rejection slips. Hamner was discharged from the Army in March of 1946 and returned to Richmond. His Aunt Nora knew he wanted to be a writer, so she introduced him to Bill Robinson, an editor of the Richmond News Leader, who referred him to local radio station WMBG. He was hired as an apprentice in the program department. For Earl, this led to a lifelong excitement about radio, its power to come into people's homes, to inform, and to entertain. He was determined to learn more, which led him to a special summer program at Northwestern University. The following fall, he applied and was accepted at the University of Cincinnati's program in broadcasting. While in Cincinnati, he worked at a variety of jobs, including a door-to-door survey. One of the people he surveyed on that job was Minna Barton, who answered the question about her vocation with the entrancing word editor, leading her interviewer to confess his goal of becoming a writer. She gave him a copy of Writer's Digest, a journal for aspiring professional writers, which was and is published locally. In June of 1948, Earl Hamner received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a major in broadcasting from the College of Music of the University of Cincinnati and was promptly hired full-time by WLW, Cincinnati's most powerful radio station, where he had worked part-time while finishing his degree. When he won an award for scriptwriting during his first year, a fellow recipient was Rod Serling, who had attended nearby Antioch College, and they formed a friendship which ended up lasting a lifetime. While working for WLW, Hamner was also deeply involved in the writing of his novel, which was to become 50 Roads to Town. When he found an ad in Writer's Digest for a modest writer's retreat cabin without electricity or running water for cheap rent, he responded. He quit his job for WLW and went to live in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas for the summer of 1949. The station hired Rod Serling to replace him, which explains why Serling in later years often introduced Hamner as the person who gave him his first job. From Arkansas, Hamner went back to Virginia for the wedding of his sister Marion to Glenn Hawkes. After the wedding, he hitched a ride up to New York City, where he found a temporary Christmas sales job at Macy's. Soon he was hired as a radio writer for the NBC network. In 1953, on a Friday afternoon, he submitted his first novel, 50 Roads to Town, to Random House. The following Monday morning, he received a call from editor Belle Becker to say that she had read his book over the weekend and that it had been accepted for publication. On the jacket, it was described as a novel based on the strange folkways of Earl Hamner's own people. When Random House sent him down to an autographing in Richmond, he learned that his Aunt Nora took to the bed after reading it, exclaiming, "Nobody in our family has ever worshipped our Maker by dancing on the piano, and no one in the family, as far as I know, has ever voided on the ground." She was referring to the fact that one scene in the book described an orgiastic religious ceremony. In another, one of the characters, a mentally challenged man, urinated out in the woods. Finally, he was able to persuade her that he was writing about fictional holy rollers in a fictional southern village and not about the Hamner family. Now, Belle Becker, of course, was the name of the editor that John Boy went to see in New York and who ultimately was the one who worked for the company that published his original book and launched his writing career up in New York. So, once again, Earl utilized aspects of his own life, including character names, in the writing of the Waltons. One of the radio programs that Hamner wrote for was Biography in Sound. Because he had been struck on a stalled subway train, he was 40 minutes late for his interview with Eleanor Roosevelt for the piece on her Uncle Teddy. When he started to apologize, she said, "Please, you gave me time to catch up on some letters." He suggested that NBC do a segment on Thomas Wolfe, and they agreed. He was able to gather many people who had been associated with Wolfe, including Tom's sister, Mabel Wolfe Wheaton. They became good friends, and she visited him often in New York. As television became more and more important, Hamner became more and more involved in that media and less involved in radio writing. In February 1954, he met Jane Martin at a New York restaurant and immediately told his friends, "I've just met the girl I'm going to marry." She was from Davenport, Iowa, and had degrees from Ward Belmont College in Nashville and the University of Iowa. At the time, she was an editor at Harper's Bazaar, and Hamner was a television writer for NBC who drove a Ford convertible and rented a cottage on Lost Lake in Upper Westchester for the weekends. They were married on October 16, 1954, at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Cathedral in New York City. In 1956, a son, Scott, was born to the couple, and in 1958, a daughter, Caroline, was born. The Hamners rented a house on Fire Island, a popular resort parallel to Long Island. Earl worked in the city during the week and then joined his family on Friday on the Daddy boat and returned to Manhattan on Monday morning on the Purgatory boat. Next door lived a man who Hamner describes as a tall, impressive, sharp-tongued guy who worked at the ad department of Time Life. He confessed he was working on what he could only divulge as a little comedy. In 1961, Joseph Heller published his Little Comedy, which turned out to be Catch-22. The same year, Dial Press published Spencer's Mountain, a novel by Earl Hamner. The title came from his paternal grandmother's family, the story from his own experience growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. That same year, with 2 young children in tow, the Hamners made the momentous and gutsy decision to move to Southern California because the center of television production was clearly moving from New York to California. They brought with them dogs, rabbits, guinea pigs, turtles, and a chipmunk. His book, The Avocado Drive Zoo, At Home with My Family and the Creatures We've Loved, 1999, describes these first years they were in California. Thank you for joining me for part 1 of my birthday tribute to Earl about his life and career. If you enjoyed this, please do hit like and subscribe. And I will be back next time for part 2 to continue talking about the life and career of Earl Hamner. Thanks for watching.